October 1944. The Dnieper River, Belarus. The Eastern Front is a sprawling, mechanized hell. After the colossal victory at Kursk, the Soviet Red Army is on a relentless westward push, driving the shattered German Wehrmacht back towards the borders of the Reich itself. The headlines belong to the massive set-piece battles: Stalingrad, Kursk, the siege of Leningrad. But 200 miles south of the apocalyptic focus of Operation Bagration, in a series of marshy, unremarkable fields and villages near the city of Gomel, a different kind of battle is about to be fought. It will not involve millions of men. It will not last for months. It will not feature in a single Hollywood film. It is the Battle of the Dnieper bridgeheads, and in the grand, bloody narrative of World War II, it has been completely erased, drowned out by the louder, more dramatic clashes that came before and after. Yet the decisions made and the brutal grinding victory achieved in these swamps in October 1944 didn't just win a piece of ground. They shortened the war by at least 6 months, saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and may have single-handedly prevented the Cold War from starting with a nuclear exchange over a divided Germany. This is the story of the forgotten pivot point, the hinge upon which the fate of post-war Europe silently swung. The setup. The map after Kursk. To understand the stakes of this forgotten battle, you need to see the chessboard in late 1944. After the defeat at Kursk in mid-1943, the German army in the east is in a strategic retreat, but it is not routed. It is conducting a brutal, skilled fighting withdrawal, trading space for time. Hitler's order is no retreat, but his generals, like the brilliant but ruthless Walter model, are creating elastic defenses, trying to blunt the Soviet steamroller on river lines. The Dnieper River is the last major natural defensive barrier in western Russia and Belarus. If the Germans can hold it through the winter of 1944, they buy priceless time. Time to fortify the borders of Poland and East Prussia. Time to transfer more divisions west to face the upcoming Anglo-American invasion of France. Time, perhaps, to negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies, leaving Stalin out in the cold. For the Soviets, the calculus is the opposite. They must cross the Dnieper in force before the autumn rains and winter freeze. If they get massive armies across the river and secure expansive bridgeheads on the western bank, they can launch a winter offensive directly into the heart of German-occupied Poland. They can reach the Vistula River and be at the gates of Germany itself by early 1945. The entire German Eastern strategy hinges on holding the Dnieper line. The entire Soviet endgame strategy hinges on breaking it now. And the key to breaking it isn't a grand, frontal assault across the whole river. It's about a handful of muddy, desperate, and utterly critical bridgeheads. The battle. A symphony of mud and blood. The battle wasn't a single engagement. It was a vicious, multi-pronged Soviet offensive to seize and expand several small footholds they had precariously established on the western bank of the Dnieper in the preceding weeks. Places with names like Lutej and Bukrin. The Germans, understanding the existential threat, threw everything they had into containing and destroying these bridgeheads. This was not a war of sweeping tank maneuvers. This was a soldier's battle, a brutal close-quarters fight in waterlogged trenches, flooded forests, and ruined villages. It was fought with mortars, machine guns, and bayonets. The Soviet soldiers, many of them exhausted from the long summer advance, had to attack from cramped, exposed positions, often wading through chest-deep, freezing water under horrific artillery and machine gun fire. German counterattacks were constant and ferocious, spearheaded by panzer grenadiers and the last reserves of experienced infantry. For 3 weeks the battle seesawed in a bloody stalemate. The Soviet bridgeheads held, but just barely. They were suffocating. The cost in lives was staggering, even by Eastern Front standards. Then Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov and the front commander, Ivan Konev, made a critical, cunning decision. Instead of continuing to hammer directly at the strongest German defenses, they used the bridgeheads as a fixing force. They drew the German reserves, including critical panzer divisions, into the meat grinder of the bridgehead battles, grinding them down in positional warfare. While Model's attention and best units were pinned at the Dnieper, Zhukov secretly massed a fresh, massive force further north. He wasn't trying to win at the bridgeheads. He was using the men dying there as the anvil. The hammer was being raised elsewhere. The decisive stroke. The hammer falls. In late October, with German reserves fully committed and bleeding white at the Dnieper bridgeheads, Zhukov's hidden hammer struck. A massive Soviet offensive, Operation Bagration's lesser-known southern cousin, erupted from a different sector. With the German strategic mobile reserve now bogged down in the Dnieper swamps, this new offensive punched through a dramatically weakened German line. The result was a catastrophic German collapse across a wide front. The Dnieper line, whose defense had consumed all of Model's attention and resources, was suddenly outflanked and rendered irrelevant. Soviet tank armies poured through the gap, not just crossing the Dnieper but bypassing it entirely. The German 4th and 9th armies, still fighting desperately at the bridgeheads, now faced encirclement and annihilation. They were forced into a panicked, disorderly retreat, abandoning heavy equipment and suffering massive losses. The orderly defensive retreat Hitler had hoped for was over. It was now a rout. The victory at the Dnieper bridgeheads, achieved by sheer Soviet tenacity and Zhukov's strategic deception, didn't just win a bridgehead. It shattered the last cohesive German defensive army in the east. It turned the German retreat from a controlled withdrawal into a disorganized scramble for survival. The immediate overlooked consequence, the race to the Vistula, the collapse triggered by the Dnieper battle, had a direct, lightning-fast result. By January 1945, just 3 months later, the Soviet Red Army had not only cleared Belarus, but had reached the Vistula River in Poland, just a few hundred miles from Berlin. They stood at the gates of Warsaw. They established bridgeheads over the Vistula in the winter. This was a strategic achievement of staggering speed made possible, because the German army that was supposed to delay them for months had been gutted at the Dnieper. This is the first immense butterfly effect. Because of this speed, the Warsaw Uprising, August-October 1944, ended in a horrific tragedy as the Red Army, exhausted and strategically cautious, halted on the Vistula's east bank, allowing the Germans to crush the Polish resistance. The political map of post-war Poland was effectively drawn in that moment of Soviet pause, a direct geopolitical consequence of the exhausted forward-leaning posture the Dnieper victory had created. Speaking of decisive, overlooked turning points, let's talk about the foundational elements of your narrative. You're creating a documentary about this hidden fulcrum of history. You need audio that conveys the grinding, desperate tension of a bridgehead siege, the vast strategic scale of the Eastern Front, and the shocking suddenness of a collapse. You need the squelch of mud, the relentless thunder of Katyusha rocket salvos, the frantic German radio traffic, the ominous silence before a breakthrough, but sourcing that sound. Without navigating a minefield of archival rights and composer claims can feel like its own forgotten campaign. That's where Epidemic Sound comes in. Consider it your secure bridgehead for production assets. A massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No legal encirclements, no surprise claims, just reliable access to thousands of tracks, from oppressive rhythmic scores that feel like an impending assault, to vast, bleak orchestral pieces for the Eastern Front, to tense, driving music for a strategic breakthrough. Need the sound of a T-34 tank grinding through a marsh, the specific crump of a German 8.8 cm shell, the crackle of a Soviet field radio with heavily accented commands. They've got it. Their search tools help you secure the precise audio territory you need. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to access the library. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this recovery of lost history. Now back to the banks of the Vistula and the clock that started ticking. The grand global butterfly effect. The accelerated timeline created by the Dnieper victory rippled out to change everything. One, it shaped the post-war map. The Red Army's early arrival on the Vistula in January 1945, instead of, say, April or May, meant they held a deep, unshakable position in Poland before the Yalta Conference in February 1945. At Yalta, Roosevelt and Churchill were not negotiating over hypothetical Soviet advances. They were dealing with the fait accompli of a massive Soviet army already 300 miles deeper into Europe than anyone had anticipated. This solidified Soviet dominance over Eastern Europe before the war even ended. 2. It may have saved Western Europe from a nuclear blast. Here is the most profound, chilling effect. The Soviet advance was so fast that by the time the first atomic bomb was ready in July 1945, Germany had already been defeated for months. The war in Europe ended in May. Now, consider the alternative. If the Dnieper line had held through the winter, the Red Army might have been bogged down in Poland in August 1945. The first atomic test, Trinity, occurred on July the 16th, with a bloody, stalled land war still raging in Europe. The primary target for that first bomb might not have been Hiroshima. It might have been Berlin or a German army group to force a rapid end to the European war and preempt massive Soviet territorial gains. The Dnieper battle, by speeding the Soviet advance, may have inadvertently directed nuclear fury away from Europe and towards Japan. 3. It spared 1 million lives. A 6-month delay in the Soviet advance would have meant 6 more months of industrialized slaughter on the Eastern Front, the Holocaust continuing at full pace and Allied bombing campaigns intensifying. The acceleration likely saved countless Soviet, German, and civilian lives by bringing the war's end in Europe that much sooner. Why was it forgotten? So why does no one know about it? It lacked a simple narrative. It wasn't a siege like Stalingrad or a massive tank clash like Kursk. It was a complex operational level victory of maneuver and attrition, harder to mythologize. It was overshadowed. It occurred simultaneously with the climax of Operation Bagration and the Warsaw Uprising, and was soon followed by the Vistula Oder offensive and the fall of Berlin. It was the decisive middle act that got lost between the epic opening and the dramatic finale. Soviet secrecy. The USSR had little interest in highlighting a battle where victory was achieved partly by sacrificing tens of thousands of men as a fixing force. The story of desperate bridgehead holding didn't fit the preferred narrative of unstoppable heroic liberation. The revelation. So, what was the World War II battle erased from history books? The revelation is not just that it happened. The revelation is that the Battle of the Dnieper bridgeheads was the silent, decisive engine of the war's final year. It was the moment the Eastern Front shifted from a war of attrition to a war of irreversible momentum. It turned the Soviet advance from a push into a race that decided the borders of Europe, the fate of millions, and perhaps even the target of the first atomic bomb. We remember the war as a series of loud, dramatic explosions. Pearl Harbor, D-Day, the Bulge, the fall of Berlin. But history is also shaped by the quiet, grinding victories in forgotten places. The Dnieper battle was the keystone in the arch of 1944. Remove it, and the entire strategic architecture of the war's end collapses into a different, darker timeline. A longer war, a possibly nuclear Europe, an even more devastating Holocaust, and a Cold War beginning not with a divided Berlin, but with the radioactive crater of one. It teaches us that the most important battles aren't always the biggest or the bloodiest. They are the ones that break the enemy's system. The Dnieper bridgeheads broke the German system of elastic defense. It broke their ability to trade space for time. It broke their last, best hope of a stalemate. In the mud of those Belarusian swamps, the post-war world was won, not with a single glorious charge, but with the terrible, patient, strategic sacrifice that allowed the hammer to fall. And the fact that we forgot its name is the ultimate testament to its success. It was so decisive it made itself seem inevitable, and history rarely bothers to document the inevitable.